The world can be a cruel and unforgiving place, and I know that you have tried to do things the right way.
Why upset that apple cart? This is a little bit of an interrogation technique. It's a miracle they got what they got.
A former NYPD inspector looks at a grieving daughter's plea and calls part of it a technique. He explains why the timing itself might be the real signal, and when he tries to explain the case's biggest technical breakthrough, he gets the mechanism wrong, twice in the same answer. Let's go through all 5. I'm Marcus Wren, the creator of the Tell Index, a framework for analyzing statements and behavior in criminal cases. Nancy Guthrie, the 84-year-old mother of Today co-anchor Savannah Guthrie, disappeared from her Tucson, Arizona home in the early hours of February 1st. Today's video breaks down a Fox News America Reports segment from July 27th, the same day Savannah posted a new video plea to her mother's suspected abductor as the case approached the 6-month mark with no suspect named. Hosts Sandra Smith and Bill Hemmer bring in retired NYPD Inspector Paul Mauro to react in real time. This is a standalone analysis of Mauro's on-air reasoning, cross-checked against the actual investigative record. Hit subscribe if you want to see more analysis like this. Right after playing Savannah's new video, Sandra asks Mauro directly, "Does the timing of this plea suggest the investigation isn't going anywhere?"
We don't know what conversations are going on between the family, Pima County Sheriff, which is still technically the lead, and as advised by the FBI. But if you're sitting with the family you certainly would have to believe that, just logically speaking here, if there was good progress being made, if they felt like they were on the cusp of potentially reuniting her with her family, and they were hearing that from law enforcement, that she would not do anything that in any way could impede that, right? Why upset that apple cart? So for her to come out now, we're 6 months out, more than 6 months roughly, right? So I feel like what has likely happened here is that the family has collectively has said, look, it's time to try to re-engage, make a connection with whoever did this.
Mauro's logic is a fairly standard piece of investigative inference. Absence of an official update, combined with a shift in family behavior, is read as a signal about the private state of the case. Not because anyone told him anything directly, but because he's reasoning backward from behavior to likely cause. Cross-checking this against the case file, this inference lines up with what's actually on the public record. Forbes reported the same day the video aired that, 6 months in, several apparent breakthroughs, including DNA found on gloves near the scene and the arrest of a person of interest, ultimately failed to identify a suspect. That person of interest, detained during a traffic stop in Rio Rico on February 10th and released after several hours, per ABC News and CNN, was the closest the case ever got to a named suspect, and it went nowhere. The reward for information has also climbed in stages that themselves track a stalling investigation. The FBI's own reward moved from $100,000 in mid-February to over $1 million by February 25th, according to NBC Palm Springs. A pattern criminal investigators recognize as a standard response when forensic and digital leads have plateaued and the only realistic remaining lead type is testimonial. Someone with knowledge coming forward. Mauro's own aside later in the segment. Someone starts talking to the police and says, "Give me a deal," describes exactly this mechanism. The same one dozens of real cold case resolutions rely on once physical evidence is exhausted. It's worth being fair here, and only once in this video. Mauro is inferring the family's private conversations with law enforcement from public behavior alone. He says so himself. We don't know what conversations are going on. That's a reasonable investigative inference, not a confirmed leak, and the same public behavior could just as easily reflect a family's own independent decision to act, made without any signal from law enforcement at all. Moments later, Bill reads back the line from Savannah's video that stood out to him most and asks Mauro what he thinks she meant by it.
The world can be a cruel and unforgiving place, and I know that you have tried to do things the right way.
And look, I'm not a psychologist, but I don't think you need to be to understand that she's trying to make a connection with this person. And, I think the implication is the kind of thing like, we know you didn't mean for it to go as far as it did. This is a little bit of an interrogation technique, and so she's probably being advised on this a little bit. I won't go any further, but as I said, it does jump out at you that here's the person who's responsible for the disappearance of her mother, and she says, I know you tried to do the right thing. Very clearly, she's trying to get some kind of a connection and appeal to him so that maybe he sees in her, something like his own mother, and maybe he will come forward, and I say he cognizantly, to at least somehow or other bring this thing to an end.
Mauro's read has a real name and a real doctrine behind it. He's just not using the term. The FBI's Crisis Negotiation Unit has taught a 5-stage framework since the 1980s called the Behavioral Change Stairway Model. Active listening, empathy, rapport, influence, and only then behavioral change. Gary Nosner, the CNU's first chief, wrote in the FBI Law Enforcement Bulletin that this model exists specifically to demonstrate that the influence we sought to gain the cooperation of perpetrators required sincere and genuine empathic engagement, language built to make a hostage taker or suspect feel seen as a person, not cornered as a target, because feeling cornered predicts violence or further concealment, while feeling recognized predicts disclosure. I know you tried to do things the right way sits exactly on the empathy rung of that ladder. It withholds judgment, offers the subject a face-saving frame. It went further than you intended, and invites him toward the next rung, voluntary contact, without ever naming a crime. Cross-checking this against the case file. This isn't a technique unique to law enforcement scripts. Savannah's own prior videos, dating back to a message posted less than 2 weeks after Nancy vanished, already used structurally similar language. You're not lost or alone. We believe in the essential goodness of every human being, per Business Insider's report on that February video. Family liaison officers assigned to real FBI kidnapping cases are trained specifically to help families craft this kind of appeal, because crisis negotiation literature reviewed by the Department of Justice found empathy-based engagement produces substantially higher rates of voluntary compliance than confrontational messaging. None of this requires Savannah to be insincere. Genuine grief and a coached, doctrinally sound appeal are not mutually exclusive. Trained language can carry a real emotion at the same time it follows a known structure. Separately from anything said in this segment, one detail becomes visible only by placing this video next to an earlier one.
I wanted to come on and it's been 2 weeks since our mom was taken, and I just wanted to come on and say that we still have hope and we still believe. And I wanted to say to whoever has her or knows where she is that it's never too late. And you're not lost or alone. And it is never too late to do the right thing. And we are here. And we believe. And we believe in the essential goodness of every human being. And it's never too late.
On Sunday, February 15th, 2 weeks after Nancy disappeared, Savannah posted this video saying, "It is never too late to do the right thing," per CBS, News, People, and Business Insider, all reporting the same night. In the July 27th video analyzed in this episode, she says, almost word for word, "I truly believe it is never too late to do the right thing." The core sentence survived more than 5 months, several rounds of ransom notes, a task force, a detained and released person of interest, and an entirely different tone of public messaging in between, largely unchanged. Cross-checking this against real crisis communication and negotiation practice. Deliberate phrase repetition across a long, unresolved appeal isn't sloppy messaging. It's a documented consistency technique. The same behavioral change stairway literature notes that rapport depends on the subject perceiving a stable, predictable, non-escalating counterpart on the other end of the communication. Reusing a recognizable phrase over months functions as a kind of signature the intended recipient can recognize as coming from the same, consistent source, rather than a message that has shifted tone or intent. It also serves a public-facing function distinct from the private one. Repeating an established phrase preserves message discipline for the wider audience covering the case, so the family's public position doesn't appear to waver just because the investigation's timeline has stretched far longer than anyone expected in February. Bill then raises the DNA and digital evidence directly, asking Mauro about earlier errors in how evidence was handled.
It seemed like such a big breakthrough when they got that doorbell video, or the still images, the video. I mean, it was startling. You got the guy with the flashlight in his mouth, armed at the front door. It finally seemed like they were honing in on a person, and then everything just kind of went quiet and cold. There was talk of DNA and using genealogy. I know you feel there were some errors with potentially the way digital evidence was collected. What were those errors?
Yeah, so the crime scene errors that people already released the crime scene too quickly, I felt that that would likely make a prosecution more difficult if we got there because of trace evidence potentially being traipsed through by the traffic going in and out.
Mauro's phrase describes, in lay terms, a real and specific forensic vulnerability. Locard's exchange principle, the founding doctrine of trace evidence, holds that every person entering a scene both deposits and picks up material, meaning uncontrolled foot traffic doesn't just fail to help. It actively adds new genetic material into the same physical space investigators are trying to isolate a single offender's profile from. Cross-checking this against the case file, this is precisely the mechanism behind a detail from earlier in this case's evidence timeline. The DNA sample recovered from inside Nancy's own home, the one most likely to be directly connected to whoever committed the crime, came back as only a partial profile sent to the sheriff's regular private lab in Florida rather than the FBI's lab at Quantico, and was never entered into CODIS. The FBI's own national database standards explain exactly why a partial, traffic-contaminated profile can die at that stage. To be searchable at the national level, a forensic partial profile must show results at a minimum of 8 of the 20 core CODIS loci and clear a minimum statistical rarity threshold, a moderate match estimate generally in the range of 1 in 10 million. Per the FBI's own CODIS and NDIS fact sheet, fall short of either threshold, and the profile is confined to the state-level database at best. Never compared against the national pool of tens of millions of offender and arrestee profiles where an actual hit could occur. A mixed or degraded sample, exactly the kind uncontrolled scene traffic produces, is the textbook way a profile falls under that 8 loci line. Meanwhile, the glove DNA recovered roughly 2 miles from the house, collected outside the contaminated interior scene, was clean enough to enter CODIS nationally, even though it returned no match. Bill's question moves to how the doorbell footage was actually recovered, and this is where Mauro offers his most detailed technical explanation of the segment.
Remember how they got the video that we have. That was the Nest camera that fed to her Wi-Fi. They were able to go into the cache of her Wi-Fi, which is a computer, essentially, the short-term memory, take those bits and bytes, and with Google's help, reconstruct that snatch of video that we saw. Remember something, the cache overwrites itself, right? It's the short-term memory. Think of it as the RAM, like on your computer. So if you have all kinds of people going in and out of that house, hitting that Wi-Fi, it's overwriting that cache. It's a miracle they got what they got. And remember something, a number of those people were family members who likely had the password. Kohlberger, for instance, we were just talking about it. His phone hit the cache of the victims in his case, his phone 12 times hit the Wi-Fi. You can get that stuff, but not if it's overwritten.
Both halves of this explanation are checkable against the public record, and both turn out to describe the wrong system. Cross-checking the first half. Per CNN's February 10th, reporting, the day the footage was released, the recovery had nothing to do with a home Wi-Fi router's local memory. Sheriff Chris Nanos had said there was no video available because Nancy had no paid Nest subscription. Investigators believed the footage was gone. What actually happened, according to CNN, CBS News, NBC News, and The Hill, all reporting the same week. Google's own engineers spent several days extracting the video from residual data located in back-end systems, Google's cloud infrastructure, not a device inside the house. CBS News specified the underlying mechanism. Nest's free tier normally retains about 3 hours of event-based cloud video before scheduled deletion, and audio-video forensic analyst Nick Barrero told CNN that even data marked for deletion can persist until the storage space is physically overwritten by new data. A server-side retention window, not a home network cache. Nanos himself, per Radar Online, described the process to reporters as peeling paint. You have images over images over images. A description of layered cloud storage, not a router's RAM. Cross-checking the second half. Kohlberger's cell phone did connect to something roughly a dozen times before the Idaho murders, but according to the probable cause affidavit itself, reported identically by Fox News, IB Times, PBS NewsHour, and CBS News, that data came from AT&T cell tower records, showing his phone connecting to towers covering the area around the victim's house, not Wi-Fi network logs. PBS reported the more precise figure as 23 pings on cell towers over 4 months. The commonly cited 12 refers to nighttime drives in a narrower summer window. Cell tower triangulation and a home Wi-Fi router's client cache are two entirely different forensic data sources, governed by different providers, different legal processes, and different retention rules. Conflating them on air isn't a small rounding error. It's citing the wrong category of evidence as precedent for this case's very different technical breakthrough. It's worth being fair here, and only once in this video. Live television analysis, delivered in real time without a script or source material in front of the guest, routinely compresses complex technical processes into rough analogies. Mauro is a former police inspector giving his best on-air explanation of two separate forensic mechanisms he likely wasn't personally involved in, not a witness misrepresenting evidence he holds. But the correction still matters because the actual mechanism, a tech company's cloud retention policy, not a home router, is the real reason this piece of evidence exists at all, and it's worth getting right. An inference about timing that lines up with a stalled investigation record. A crisis negotiation technique with an actual FBI name, used exactly as the doctrine describes. The same sentence reused across 5.5 months for a specific reason. A real forensic principle behind a vague description of scene contamination. And a technical explanation of the case's biggest breakthrough that gets corrected by 5 separate outlets. Which of these 5 stood out most to you? Leave a comment below. I read everyone. And hit subscribe to see more analysis like this.